So thank you everybody for coming. We have two working languages, which is Russian and English, and we have interpreters who also came from Tallinn yesterday. So if you don't speak English or you don't understand English, just put on your headphones. We can use both languages, but as we're here in the Parliament, I will start in English. Thank you once again for coming. I believe that we have a very important topic to discuss. I thank our colleagues, Guetta, who is from my political group, Renew Europe, and who is shadow rapporteur on Russia, and Sergey Lagodinsky, who is coming from Greens political group, and who is also Russian, at least partly.
And Russian origin.
From Russian origin. He's German, yes, but you know, partly, I mean, he understands Russia maybe a bit better than any other member of this House, but many of them, let's say. Vadim Polishchuk is advisor of our political group Renew, and here we are to discuss what we called New Iron Curtain and its impact on political rights. Initially, it was planned that here will be also Dmitry Muratov, Nobel Prize laureate of previous year and editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta, but unfortunately today he has to go to court in Moscow about closing his newspaper, so for obvious reasons he couldn't come, unfortunately. But he recorded his intervention. And today on 7th of December, we are in 287th day of war. 287th day since Russia invaded Ukraine, since first people were killed there, and it changed everything in Europe, and it changed also everything here in the Parliament, not to mention Ukraine. Of course, Ukrainians are suffering enormously. In November, we had 18% of Ukrainian population here in European Union, and winter is coming, and winter is cold, and we know that infrastructure in big cities is destroyed by Russians, which means that we have to prepare for a new wave of refugees. And we also bear huge political responsibility how to help Ukraine. And here in this House, we are doing so. And I believe that all Europe is showing solidarity towards Ukraine. We are imposing sanctions, we are giving money, many member states are also giving weapons, and so on and so forth. But yesterday there was a news that in Latvia they stopped license of Russian opposition TV channel Dost. And I wrote on Facebook that it is not a smart decision. And today in the morning when I get overview of mentioning of Yana Toom in social media, I found a huge amount of angry comments in Twitter with hashtag all Russians are guilty. And I can agree with this if it comes to me. I really feel guilty, for I was one of those politicians who did not recognize the real threat coming from Russia, and I was ready to bet on the evening on 23rd February that Russia will not start this war. But what I wanted to discuss today, and I believe that this is extremely important, how can we find balance? Are really all Russians guilty? And by imposing these sanctions and bans and everything that we're doing here, do we really help Ukraine or we help somebody else? I don't know if I understand things properly, so to say, but this is the point where we start. And now I give the floor to our moderator, who is Vadim Polishchuk, and he will continue with this event. And thank you once again for coming, and thank you for connecting remotely to this discussion. Thanks.
Sorry. Yes, my name is Vadim Polishchuk. I'm working here in the European Parliament for Renew Political Group, but today, in my capacity of moderator, my personal capacity, please take note of this. I have several, you all know, for our main participants, and I think that we should start directly by giving the floor to Dmitry Muratov. Unfortunately, as Yana explained, has to spend his morning hours in a Russian court rather than here with us. But we have a video that he sent us, and I ask our technical assistants to start this video.
I will start with the weather forecast. It is the following. Tonight in Zaporizhia it will be -7, -4 in Lviv, -6 in Kiev tonight. Between -5 and -7 tonight in Chernihiv. In Bila Tsyrkva, where my mother, who is luckily still alive, was born, the forecast for tonight is -5, -7. Tens of millions of people in Ukraine will spend this night without heat, water, electricity, sewage system, and many of them even without telephone connection, which means that it is impossible to share the warmth even with each other. The right to heat, though, the right to wash one's hands, the right to make some tea, to cook your porridge, and the right of a child to sleep in their own room on their own pillow, after all. It's happening right now, in the 21st century, in the center of Europe. This has become the most important human right, the right to life. There can be thousands of reasons why Russia attacked Ukraine, from the failure of the Minsk agreement to personal offense. But the consequences are enormously out of proportion with the reasons. If in 2020 and in 2021 around 8 to 12 people died because of the Ukrainian troops' shellings in Donbass, according to the commissioners for human rights in the self-proclaimed republics, then now deaths are counted by thousands and tens of thousands. We can see that the interests of rulers and states are once again above the interests of individuals. The state is once again claiming that an individual must give their life for the state. The state considers death to be a duty of a person to themselves. At the meeting with the women whose children had died during this so-called special military operation, President Putin formulated a thought. I will describe it in my own words. That death for your motherland is the ultimate goal of life. This is the fundamental violation of human rights. The right to life is the most important human right. There is another right, the right of planet Earth to survive despite the fact that humans exist on it. If humankind will allow the nuclear button to be pushed, many more people will die at once than during World War II. I am aware of the mathematical and physical models of a modern nuclear conflict. 150 million tons of ash from burnt forests, people, houses would rays and temporarily cover the sun. The vegetative period, the period of ripening of food on the planet, would increase sharply, leading to famine. There would be no harvest. 70 to 90 million people would die from cold and hunger. It would be inevitable. So there is a new human right, the right to live on planet Earth. Geopolitics is against the life of humankind. This is the new reality. Just look at this. The most tragic story of our times is the story of refugees. Almost 14 million Ukrainians have left their homes. Right now, the cold and the bombing of power plants, the so-called critical infrastructure by Russia, will force an additional 3 to 7 million innocent people to seek refuge. And do not forget that their suffering is planned. It's a plan. It's a constructed hell. The ideologists of the invasion have no doubt that Europe will plunge into chaos with this modern exodus of millions of people. The countries accepting refugees will get tired of sharing their comfort. The infrastructure will not handle this, and the government will collapse. And the long-awaited chaos will begin that will be considered a victory. Chaos is the time of dictators. What can confront chaos? Only human solidarity can confront chaos. Now is the time for European values. It's the time to make them not just legal provisions. It's time to apply them in practice. It's time to turn them from legal terms into everyday rules. Help and compassion, jobs and schools for refugees' children. We know that evil always has very good management. Unfortunately, goods management is always much worse. Evil's management is efficient. We need to turn goods management efficient. The new management of good, generous and efficient, has to stand up against chaos and revenge-seeking. We need to overcome helplessness. There is no better time for a fierce protection of human rights than now. At that moment, when the power of the state is stronger than citizens' rights, all dictators in the world are celebrating. It's not a small thing. Russian immigrants are denied security now. These are people who are fleeing in order to avoid participating in warfare, people who are fleeing mobilization, those who, in the absence of a choice, are voting with their feet against something that they do not support, the current agenda of the Russian state. Maybe we should stop repeating this benevolent nonsense that these people had to take to Red Square and seize the Kremlin and not try to cross the borders and seek refuge. This is a populist pre-election lie. Sadly, modern dictatorships with their armies, their secret police, their weapons, can't be beaten by ordinary, unarmed people in flesh and bone. You will probably agree that for a long time Europe has been pumping up the Kremlin as well, giving it strength and money. 500 to 600 million euros a day for energy, and now we are looking for the guilty among those who are fleeing from the horror of being forced to participate in this war. Have we found the right victim? Are we looking for justice in the right place? Let's reach out to those who want peace. Humanization of borders has to exist for those who are escaping hostile regimes all around the world. I am not only talking about Russia now. I know that's very Russian style, to teach everyone how to live. I will not teach everyone how to live, but I will still say it. Closing borders is exactly what warmongers want. They want, again, this predominance of the state over human rights. I am sure that human solidarity and the anti-war movement are the most important things ahead of us. Saving refugees and ensuring the right of every child for their toy under the blanket. This is what will save all of us from 150 million tons of ash above our heads. I would like to show you a picture that was made at the Anna Politkovskaya award ceremony. Her portrait happened to be right behind the microphone. She seems to be speaking in this photograph. Let's not forget that modern journalism is an antidote to war. I would like to thank the Baltic states for helping my colleagues who were forced to create their media in exile. This help is incredibly important, and I am deeply grateful to those who have found their shelter and found once again their profession in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and other European countries. And last but not least, in Russia, in its newly formed ideology, which is quite an imperialistic one, the country's history is presented as a history of wars, and the history of wars is presented as a series of victories. I will never agree that death for the motherland is more useful to my country than life for the motherland. It also reflects the fundamental difference between the right of the state and the right of a citizen. Let's stand for the citizens' rights. This is all I wanted to say. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion.
So, unfortunately, it's video, and we cannot ask Mr. Muratov any questions and so on, so I will permit myself only to make one small comment. So Mr. Muratov actually is talking about those people who fled the country, fled Russia, who is staying outside it, and he is raising a very important question of treatment of these people in terms of human rights, but also according to some moral standards. But we have several other participants who will be actively participating in a more interactive manner. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Guetta, who is from Renew Group of the European Parliament, and he is Vice Chair of the Subcommittee of Human Rights and a rapporteur on Russia. The floor is yours. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
The political life is quite unpredictable, especially for such busy members of this House. So we will change a little bit our program. So the floor will be given to Mr. Sergey Lagodinsky, who is Vice Chair of the Committee of Legal Affairs.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Sorry, from the
Greens. Yes, thanks so much, and thank you, Yana, thank you, Bernard, for hosting this meeting. It's I wouldn't say it's a pleasure to be here, because the topics that we're talking about and the situation in which we are not very pleasant, and I think it is also important, also following what Mr. Muratov said, to put this into context. And this context is war, and this context is that we are in a morally charged territory. And this morally charged territory means that all actors and all parties do bear responsibility for a moral re-evaluation. And I think that the discussion about the role and the situation around the TV channel Dozhd, TV Rain, but also in many other cases, is not only a cause for us looking at civil rights, which I think, and I will come to that, but it is also a cause to discuss for those who are Russian speakers, who come from Russian society, who have shaped Russian society and Russian discourses, both in terms of kind of the Moscow bubble, but also within the opposition, to question ourselves, just as Yana said regarding herself as well, what went wrong in terms of our moral integrity and in terms of our moral positions. And I say our because I also include Europeans into this. This is the moral setting. This is the moral minefield on which we're walking, and we should be very careful not to overstep the lines, especially during the war. It must be very clear that the victims and the main victims of this war are Ukrainians. And I think this is important to reiterate. And yes, there are difficulties, and there are difficulties that will be addressed at this panel, but they are not comparable to the genocidal attacks on Ukrainian people that are taking place under the flag of the Russian Federation and following the developments in the Russian society. And of course you can say also that Europe has contributed to that. And of course Europe have. And being German, we have always reminded our government about our responsibility. We have always objected to Nord Stream 2, and yet the government went through with the Nord Stream 2. And yes, in Latvia or in other states, of course they sold property to Russian citizens because it was important to attract capital. And now there is a presence of Russian citizens that maybe is not to the liking of the governing. But this is also homemade. So the role of Europeans is there as well, but the main role is of the Russian society, because the Russian society has let it come under the most difficult situations to what it came. And we will need a discussion, a self-reflected, and this discussion already started also within the opposition leaders, within the intellectuals, about the collective responsibility of the Russian cultural sphere, of Russian culture, in terms of its imperial features, and this is important. However, coming from Germany, I would like also to bring something which is an important differentiation within the German society. It's a differentiation between collective responsibility and collective guilt. And this is the very, very thin and very nuanced balance that we should not overstep. And I'm saying we as European Union. And from that perspective, I think that the main corset, the main package which helps us not to overstep those lines is the legal realm. And being a vice chair of the Legal Affairs Committee, being a member of the monitoring group of rule of law and democracy, I would like to urge all member states and all governments to remember that we are all, and that we all share values and legal norms of the European Union and also of the European Convention on Human Rights. For example, if it is about free press and freedom of opinion. And yes, we are in a very difficult situation, also, and especially the bordering states, the states bordering Russia. And we have to also accept that this situation is also a dilemma. It offers dilemma from many perspectives, also from security perspectives. But we need to balance this in a way that we will not be ashamed in a couple of years, and that we will not start demolishing this rule of law and this legal package that we all are so proud about. And when we criticize other states, we should also look at ourselves. So from that perspective, I do think that it is important, for example, to uphold the right of asylum for the people who want to knock at our doors. And even if the borders are maybe a little bit more closed than they used to be before. We put it in our resolution, the right to individual asylum should be upheld also on the border towards Russia. This is something that we say vis-à-vis our southern borders. Why don't we do this vis-à-vis our eastern or northeastern borders? And the same is true also with freedom of opinion and freedom of press. I am very concerned about the situation surrounding Dost and the situation there. And as I already said, we should ask moral questions and questions of responsibility vis-à-vis the TV Rain, TV Dost. But at the same time, these questions are for the civil society and the press to discuss, but not for law enforcement instruments at this point. This is different than Russia Today. Russia Today is a state-owned or state-influenced, well, it's state-owned propaganda TV channel. TV Rain is a different, it's not perfect, but it's an independent TV channel. And we should adhere to those rules. So let's look at ourselves and do homework in terms of our own moral responsibility, but let's stick to the legal European Union standards. This is the most important point today, because this war will hopefully end, and I hope it will end with the victory of Ukraine with our support, and we will need to continue with our European Union, also with Ukraine as a member of the European Union, and with the European Union as union of values, rule of law, and civil rights. This is important.
Thank you very much. But because one of our key speakers is about to leave, I think as an exception, I think that I can collect one question. And he will be able to answer it and to proceed with his political and other commitments. Do we have a question from? Okay, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to follow up a bit on this issue and to ask about the distinguishing not only sin and responsibility, but admitting responsibility of all Russian society. I think my question is also whether we can also admit individual merits of some people who were and have been involved in opposing war, who were warning about this war before it started, like Mr. Muratov, who just spoke. He was speaking while he was receiving Nobel Prize quite clearly that this war is going to happen in a very short time, maybe in weeks, maybe in months. We know people who started to oppose this aggression since 2014, who have been always very clear on Crimea issues, and I talk about people, for example, from feminist resistance. I talk about, for example, members of now destroyed memorial that is going to get a Nobel Prize in a few days. Hundreds of people connected to memorial are now in the European Union. Some are seeking asylum. Hundreds of LGBTIQ activists are in Europe seeking asylum or trying to stay in some other way, or trying to cross the border, or trying to receive the visas. And moreover, on behalf of our partners from LGBTIQ plus movement, we know that many decided to stay in Russia, but they badly need visas for international cooperation, or for not being completely isolated in a situation when each of them is going to run bigger risk of arrest. And those who stay are, in my opinion, taking great risks, and their merit is that they will stay with people who need them in the country. Thank you.
Excuse me, but could you please name yourself?
I'm Stefania Kulaeva from Anti-Discrimination Center Memorial, Brussels.
From my perspective, number one, I think, and this is something that I advocate and advocated, we should expand humanitarian visa both on national levels and on European levels. And the European Parliament has been calling for introduction of humanitarian visas since 2018, I think. And maybe this is now the chance to have another try in introducing humanitarian visa for those who have always been against the regime, or have always been, or long been against the war. I think this is absolutely a humanitarian calling and a humanitarian necessity for the European Union. At the same time, and I myself am happy to help, and I do help a lot of people who try, for example, to get to Germany. At the same time, I would like to call to something that I call moral humility. There is only one side which I will not direct this call to, and this is the Ukrainian side. Ukrainians, heroes, and Ukrainian population who is being hit now by this war of aggression has every moral right to see in every Russian, or everyone who has a Russian name, or everyone who has a Russian origin, to be careful about them. I don't think we can teach them now. But there are two sides where I think that moral humility would be important. One side is those Russians who have always been against the war and always been against Putin. I think it is important that these citizens, these people with whom I ally from humanitarian reasons and from solidarity, and whom we try to help, they have to understand that we are in a very, very complicated, morally complicated point of history, and that sometimes it probably is important to stick to legal rights and to fight for legal rights, but not to start moralizing and to advocate some moral positions, no matter how legitimate they seem for these people. That's why I'm saying we need to stick to legal paradigm, because nobody in the EU, nobody will win this moral struggle, moral competition, because now the only moral high ground are Ukrainians, and the only moral low ground is the Russian government. And with that, unfortunately, everyone who is tainted and who is poisoned and toxic because of the Russian government. And the second actor and the second side where I think we need moral humility, and which I don't see, are the member states of the European Union, all member states of the European Union. I think it is really morally questionable to put ourselves and all member states, no matter Western European, Southern European, Eastern European, Central European or Baltic states, to put these states and these governments on the same moral high ground as Ukrainians. We don't have this moral high ground. We were not attacked. We are not bombed. And that's why I think it is important that the talk of certain governments who speak as if they were Ukrainians is morally problematic. And we should also tone this also down and look at the legal framework and look at our European responsibility in whatever shadings. And it's not just responsibility of Germans. And it's not just responsibility of French. As I mentioned, also other states have participated in this year, in this past years, in various ways, collaborating with Russian government and Russian regime. So let's leave the moral high ground for the victims of the aggression and for the heroes of this war, for Ukrainians, and let's stick to the moral humility, both the Russian opposition and the Russian civil society and EU member states.
Thank you very much. But I'm personally a bit surprised that the Vice Chair of Committee on Legal Affairs is talking more about moral rights than about legal rights. But
no, I'm not talking. I'm saying this is what we should stick to legal rights.
Yes, you said that.
and we should not start in a moral competition within European Union, because we will not win them, this moral competition. The moral competition will win Ukrainians. That's it. They already won this competition.
Okay. Thank you very much. So now I can give the floor finally to Mr. Guetta.
Okay. 3-4 weeks ago, I was in Paris with a delegation from a small organization whose name is You for You, United for Ukraine. This is a network of parliamentarians from the 27 member states of the European Union supporting Ukraine, and we were in Paris lobbying the French authorities in favor of more weapons, more financial support, and more diplomatic support. One of the young Ukrainian parliamentarians was completely destroyed and terribly upset. And after a few hours, I asked him, "What's wrong with you?" And he told me, almost crying, my best friend was just killed. On the battlefield, of course. And he told me, I had them. The Russian. What could I tell you? It was very difficult for me. Less than for him, of course. But difficult. And after a few minutes, I told him, I would like to tell you the story of my mother during the war. Her family was arrested, and she was 13 years old, living on the streets. And one day she read on a wall at La Sorbonne, "We don't have to hate German, we have to hate Nazis." And she was so impressed by that she decided, after the war, when I was born, that I would have a German babysitter. And I had a German babysitter, which was simply incredible when you think about the situation. She was with no family, except my father and I. I was the most precious gift she could have dreamed. And the babysitter was German. And when I said that to my Ukrainian friend, he understood the message, of course. And he told me, "Well, Bernard, I understand what you mean, but I had them. So I tried, after the personal stories, to speak politics with him. And I told him, let's not be blind. Think about the big demonstration a few months ago, a few years ago. Think about the feelings of freedom and joy during the perestroika in Russia. And don't tell me, and don't ever think, because it would be pure blindness, that by DNA the Russian people would be barbarians, monsters, enemies of freedom, and I don't know what. I try to tell him also that in any case, it would be completely counterproductive to think so. First, because this is not the truth. But secondly, because one day or another, you, the Ukrainian, we, all the people living in the European continent, will need to build up stability and prosperity on our continent. And to build up stability and prosperity in Europe, we need an agreement with the Russian people. And so we will need the Russian Democrats. And so we will need the young people who are now voting with their feet, trying to leave, to flee. Not Russia, but Putin's regime and this war. So we got at least to be realistic. We will need one day or another Russian Democrats, because Russian Democrats do exist. He was still skeptical because he was still destroyed. So I tried the last point. I told him, but let's be smart. Let's be almost cynical. In politics, the basic principle is to make friends rather than to make enemies. And you, as an Ukrainian citizen, and you and I as European citizen, and you and I as human being, we need to have friends in Russia, because in any case, Russia will exist on the European continent. And so let's forget about the impossibility to build up something good with this country and this nation. So let's not fail those people voting with their feet, demonstrating, risking jail, risking camps, risking condemnations. And let's remember that if Mr. Putin decided to edict new laws, 15 years in jail, 15 years in jail, just for the one word, war. Just for using one word, war. Why did he make that? Because all Russian people by DNA are bellicists and monsters? Just think about it. I told my friend, just think about it. If there was such a necessity for Putin, the explanation is that too many people on his eyes, on Putin's eyes, were against the war. And if this propaganda apparatus, Pierre Canal, damned, Pierre Canal, is so adamant to say so many foolish things, to be polite. This is because they feel the necessity to try to put lies in the head of the Russian people. And whenever a dictatorship organizes propaganda, lies, incredible lies, why do they do that? Because this is a necessity to change the mind of the people, to change the mind of the people. And so the first reaction of the Russian people is not, certainly not, let's go to Kiev to kill the Ukrainians. Mr. Putin has to teach them, to try to teach them why they should be happy and adamant to go to Kiev to kill Ukrainians. So we will need those people, and let's not play Putin's game, because by refusing to give visa and protection to those Russian fleeing dictatorship, we are helping Putin to tell his nation, the Russian nation, you see, they, in the so-called democracies, they in the West hate us, want to destroy us, want to kill us, and so on and so on. So it's a terrible moral mistake to refuse visa and protection to those people. But more than that, this is an incredible, excuse me to say so, stupidity, because by doing that, we play Putin's game. I'm sorry about it. It's always like that. We play Putin's game. And so let's not play Putin's game. Let's give visa, protection, asylum, support to those brave Russian people. Thank you.
Okay, now I think we can make ask very short question from other key speaker, and then we'll proceed.
Yes, if I may, it was a very nice speech, Bernard, But yes, we both know that we cannot transpose it into political will, which is a pity. The next speaker, Ekaterina, who is waiting there, he is a Russian activist, and she will speak about herself. But I just have to tell her story. We wanted her to come to Brussels, and we wanted her to have visa. And I was very hopeful, for this is not Estonia, this is Belgium, heart of European democracy. And we even got a letter from the cabinet of Prime Minister of Belgium asking a Belgium embassy to give her visa. But no, they did not. They said, it's suspicious, you probably will not go back, despite the fact that she has 2 small children in Russia who are staying and not traveling with her. So this is the reason why she is intervening remotely now. And this is how it works in practice, unfortunately. But my question is from absolutely different topic. But as we have Estonian journalists here, I believe that maybe they will also be interested to know. It was a huge scandal in Estonian media. I'm sorry, this is my mom. It was a huge scandal in Estonian media when they quoted President Macron, who said that we have to find for Russia security guarantees. And you probably have seen all these comments made by Mr. Pite and others that no security guarantees for Russia until the... What is this? And in Estonia, he was basically accused in destroying European solidarity. I understand very well the logic behind what he said, but what is your reflection on that? I ask you you're from the same country, basically. You're, yes, one of his political allies. Good please. Good excuse.
You know, at the end of the First World War, basically the UK, France, and the USA decided to take revenge on Germany. And we did so. We also dismantled the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And 20 years after that, there was the result of this blindness, the Second World War. And fortunately, in 1947, France, UK, USA, the winners, decided to help Germany to rebuild itself as a democracy, and a prosperous one, and a stable one. And we were successful. And we were successful. And now Germany is a stable and democratic and prosperous country. Thanks to the Marshall Plan, thanks to the smartness of the winners in 1947. And this is an incredible success for peace and stability. And so when Mr. Putin's regime and Mr. Putin himself will be defeated, because they have to be defeated. Because they have to be defeated first. We will have to decide between the mistake made by the Traité de Versailles and the success achieved by the Marshall Plan. And when President Macron keeps saying that we will have, after Mr. Putin's defeat, to find a way to organize stability, confidence, and prosperity on our continent, I think, and not only because I'm French, because I'm a rational person, knowing history, I think is perfectly right. And that we will have to give guarantee, security guarantee, not only to Russia, but to all the people of our continent. Maybe some of you remember the expression used by late President Gorbachev, Общий дом. Общий дом. Наш континент – это наш общий дом.
Our continent is our shared house, as Mr. Gorbachev said.
Thank you very much. And we are running out of time a little bit, so I give the floor directly to our next speaker, Ekaterina Mnatsakanyan. The floor is yours.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? So I'm going to speak in Russian today, despite the fact that I could speak in English or in German, and also in French. But my native language is Russian. I am just an ordinary person. When on the 24th of February, many of us who are in Russia now could not believe it. I'm not as clever as Dmitry Muratov. I didn't see what was happening around. And we living inside the guilt and responsibility that should be differentiated, we're looking for a path to manage with what is happening in our country. And one of the paths was to help refugees. Because, and many of the present people were speaking about that, there are not so many secure ways how to make good things. When you help refugees, here being in the Russian Federation, you can see many different people around you. I have dealt with tens or hundreds or thousands of people. These were all different people with different political beliefs, with different attitudes to what is going on. And despite the fact that there are some cases when my refugees so when working with refugees is to help them, no matter what they're thinking or what I feel. And there are a lot of volunteers who follow the same path, who, as it seems to me, are doing a very important work of the present, which is available. Volunteers connect people. Volunteers help people who lost almost everything, or everything, who lost their relatives. They help those people to survive and start their new life. And then they also make personal connections between Ukrainians and Russians, between European volunteers as well, who help people to move abroad. This is the most wonderful miracle that I can see, that people, against all odds, help those who are in need. I helped to take quite a lot of people across the border, and many people who I worked with were very ill people, so with cancer, for example, with different wounds, with amputated arms and legs. These are the people with autism, So people with different diseases and illnesses. The interpreter cannot hear what is the speaker is saying.
Не слышно вас. Не слышно. Картинка есть, звука нет.
Сейчас.
Екатерина, вас не слышно. Давайте так.
Ekaterina, we cannot hear you. Now, yes, we can hear you now. But you keep jamming.
I think because we have some technical issues, I think we can.
Могу я говорить?
Попробуйте.
So try.
So I think that we will stop. We will stop now, and we will ask Ekaterina maybe to try to join us again. Yeah, because maybe to switch off and switch on, it helps sometimes. I would like to use this opportunity because Ekaterina we see that she's dealing with very important but very also difficult work, and it's absolutely clear that he even became emotional simply describing her everyday activities, and she mentioned already that they're dealing with assistance to people who won't leave Russia. She meant refugees, but we know that it may be issue, especially in Baltic states, to cross the border, both for Ukrainian refugees and for Russian refugees, or for Russians who prefer to flee the country. And it also raised many issues, how it's correspond to international and European law standards. And I would like to use this good opportunity to give the floor to my good colleague from the Greens political group, Alexei Dimitrov, who is a good expert on this topic with quite rich experience of dealing in this house with migration issues, and who is also a Latvian lawyer and with good knowledge of Estonian cases, as far as I know. And so maybe he would like to comment on the situation as he sees, and especially, so do we really have a functioning Schengen Code or other directives on deal with resident permits in the Baltic states? What's about freedom of movement in international law sense, and what with free movement in EU law sense? Alexei, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Like usual disclaimer applies, but I speak expressing my personal opinion rather than position of the Greens EFA in the Parliament, especially during the Renew event.
Don't be so shy. We are allies.
Definitely, in most cases, definitely. So, the legal situation is pretty clear. So we have harmonized standards in the EU law regarding the issuance of Schengen visas and the right of entry, so covered by the Schengen Borders Code. In the same time, I must say, the member states, they have certain discretion in deciding where exactly they decide to come to the conclusion that certain persons represent a threat to national security, for example, or public health and so on. Basically, there are like three reasons where a visa or the entry with a valid visa can be denied. And of course, we have some Commission's guidance in this field, because the Commission, when the situation during the war started to develop and some member states started to introduce certain restrictions covering, for example, Russian citizens or Belarusian citizens, the Commission issued some guidance basically saying still that there needs to be an individual assessment, but at the same time recognizing that in some situations member states, they can come to the conclusion that a certain person could represent a threat. So I think like legally the main problem is that some member states, they indeed apply a certain presumption that all Russian or, for example, Belarusian citizens, they represent a security threat. The question is whether this presumption will stand if eventually some cases reach the Court of Justice, because the Court of Justice is the highest judicial body to interpret European law and in particular the Visa Code and the Schengen Borders Code. And another legal problem which might be raised in that context is the prohibition of discrimination. Because when we apply European law, we also apply the prohibition of discrimination as enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And the question is whether such presumptions based on nationality, they comply or they don't comply with the prohibition of discrimination in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. You can find some arguments both in favor and against, because, well, normally in most situations we wouldn't say that discrimination on grounds of nationality is valid, is legally valid. In the same time, well, sometimes we do apply such differential treatment on grounds of nationality, and possibly the best example is visa waivers. So the Union decides that we grant visa waivers for particular countries. So people with a certain nationality, they have kind of enhanced rights to enter the European Union. Apart from that, I think another interesting issue would be to address the human rights implications, because in most cases, we don't really have the human right to stay in a particular country. So this is why, for example, when we have cases on migration in the European Court of Human Rights, in most cases it is the state winning the case, but there could be still situations, well, I cannot really give any particular example, but if eventually there could be some family ties of a Russian citizen or Belarusian citizen with someone on the European soil, and these family ties don't have to be like officially recognized necessarily, we could speak about possible negative consequences for the right to private and family rights, life under Article 8 of the European Convention. But my final point would be that I see a kind of overarching legal problem here. There is a famous textbook in international law, like with many editions over the decades, called Oppenheim's International Law, and there are two volumes. One volume is called Peace, another one is called War. And from that we can clearly see that there is a clear distinction in international law, which standards we apply during the time of peace and which standards we do apply during the time of war. The problem with the current situation of EU law is that we still apply peacetime standards to the situations where many of us believe that we take part in this war on the Ukrainian side. And it is highly problematic because officially none of EU member states made a derogation from the European Convention on Human Rights and didn't introduce any emergency situation. In the same time, we see that the treatment by politicians and sometimes also judicial authorities clearly differs from the standard they would apply during the peacetime. So perhaps for the sake of legal certainty, we could initiate some legal discussions whether the peacetime standard is still appropriate or we need some modifications in the standards in order to accommodate the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For me, it was professional pleasure as always listening to you. But yeah, we're living in a hybrid time, the time of hybrid threats. And the situation, yes, hybrid, no war, no peace, yes, but the standards, but we are living also in a rule of law countries. So for us, what the law book says is more important, the law book say is more important than our feelings about it, I think. But maybe it's my professional defamation Deviation, sorry, yeah, and defamation of politician, but I can't because I'm in my personal capacity. Okay, now I think we could try to connect back to Ekaterina. Ekaterina, can you hear me? Ekaterina, вы меня слышите?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Please. Sorry for these technical problems. Let's start. Let's start. Let's continue.
Okay, then let us continue. I would like to say some words about the refugees. Yeah, we do take a lot of people out, and mostly these are the people who are from the Russian part of front line. Then they do everything to get to Europe. And it was surprising for me to observe and see the fact that those refugees who go across the Russian border points, they have more discrimination on the border across the EU, and mostly it is connected with Estonian border crossing points. On the other hand, Finland accepts almost every refugee, and all refugees who were denied entry from the side of Estonia mostly went to Finland. And I am surprised and astonished. Why do we have these double standards in different European countries? We cannot explain that to our refugees. Our refugees are the people who are from the countryside with a low level of education, who don't speak any foreign languages. It is very difficult to for them to explain to the officer at the border crossing point why they spend some time in the Russian Federation. And I usually say those people who went through bombardment could spend some time to just refresh themselves, to get new power. And sometimes when we need to use some attorneys to help refugees to cross Estonian, Latvian or Polish borders, it makes me surprised why we should use attorneys' help. Sometimes people cannot cross the border within 1 or 2 months, and also those passengers who have the passport of Lugansk, Donetsk People's Republics. And there is another category of people with two passports, holding two passports of Ukraine and Russia. And no matter if those people had lived a long time in the territory of Ukraine or Lugansk or Donetsk People's Republics. And if Estonians or Polish border guards find Russian passports on those people, then those people will be denied the entry to their countries. And I cannot understand this, because these are the same similar refugees as others. And of course, being here, I can see that refugees who go through Russian territory are seen in a different light at the European borders. And I would like this attitude to be changed, because these are refugees anyway, and they should not be interrogated for hours on borders. They shouldn't be intimidated, because these are ordinary people who came to the border crossing points with having gone through many difficulties. Sometimes we can hear people asked, why did it take you so much time to get here? Why didn't you start moving earlier? And it is difficult to answer these questions because the inner preparedness to start moving somewhere, to change one's life, is the individual choice of each person. And if we look at those provisions or basis why those people are denied entry is not understandable to me. This is everyday practice, everyday life that I can see in my voluntary work. And today, we could hear that there are a lot of Russian people who, with all their compassion, with all their eyes opened wide, look at what is going on around. And there are a lot of people like this. The only thing that I can say now is that we do exist, we are people, and we try to help as much as we can. And oftentimes we can see injustice in those places where we wouldn't have expected it to have. And this breaks our hearts. Because when you take the refugees from Taganrog or Rostov across the whole country, and then they are denied entry because they said something wrong at the border, or it took them longer to come to the border. This is not merciful. We can speak about volunteers. We can speak about what the topics that you were talking about, like humanitarian visas, about open eyes, about some silly people find enemies, clever people find friends. But in conclusion, I would like to say that all in all of us should remain people, should remain humane, and every one of us makes their own personal choice, and this choice gives us an opportunity to remain human. It may be emotional, it may be rational, but I would like you to know that we exist here, that we help as much as we can. And every day this help will continue until it is needed. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much.
Time for questions to our key speakers. And after that, I hope we will have also time for statements. So let's start with questions. Please name yourself and say who will be the addressee of your question.
Okay, so I'm Olga. I'm a trainee at the European Parliament. And to begin with, I will abstain from commenting on a lot of things during this session because for me it just doesn't make sense. But I have 3 questions, and the first one would be about Dozhd. You know that Dozhd was not closed for nothing. It was closed for a reason, and there are numerous evidence when Dozhd was openly spreading Russian propaganda narratives, as, for example, Dozhd presenters numerously called Russian barbarians waging war of aggression in Ukraine as our army. And Dost presenters were showing map in which annexed Crimea was indicated as Russian during its shows. These are evidence. And just last week, Alexei Krostelev in the live broadcasting, referring to violations during the mobilization in Russia, called on viewers to help Russian servicemen with equipment and just basic amenities at the front. So Russian opposition representative or just Dost broadcaster openly called on viewers to support Russian army during the live streaming. So this question would refer, I don't remember to whom exactly from speakers, but is there really no reason for Dost closing, for the license suspension? And should it be just keep working and spreading Russian propaganda narratives under the mask of opposition? Just like that? Because they are Dost and they has been long time viewed as the opposition channel?
Thank you very much. The question is
clear.
I
have two more.
Sorry, no. Let's one by one, because maybe we'll have other. So the first question about Dost. The question is clear. For me, it's okay. I'm not. For me, okay, I was always my personal views that I was always based on the presumption that Dost was in general quite anti-war and quite pro-Ukrainian. But okay, there could be different views on this in spite of some statements or some mistakes made by some journalists during some streamings. But nevertheless, I think that I would like to address maybe this question not to our key speakers, but again to Alexei Dimitrov, because he's still with us, because he is a Latvian lawyer. And I know that you commented already to Latvian media on this, so maybe you will shed some light on some legal aspects of the situation about Dost, and then we ask our key speakers maybe to comment on it also.
Well, indeed, the decision appeared yesterday. So there is an article in the Latvian law on electronic media which allows the National Council for Electronic Media to withdraw the broadcasting license from a particular broadcasting company. And the ground for that was the threat to state security and public order. So as regards the decision in itself, as it's on 35 pages, so probably the Dost will decide whether to appeal against it or not. So they have 1 month in order to appeal against it. Indeed, the violations quoted were related to the fact that both during broadcasting, but also outside, for example, in private statements on some social media, some TV presenters and also the beneficial owner of Dost, Sindeyeva, they made some comments which, in the opinion of the Council, represent support for the Russian army. In the same time, as regards this particular statement regarding the support, as far as I understand, there was no supported claim, and there was a letter from the State Security Service addressed to the Council. And from that letter, it's not really clear whether they support this claim, but actually the TV channel was supporting the army by funding or collecting some materials for that. So, of course, if this latter aspect will be proven, investigated and proven, of course, it would be quite a strong allegations in favor of withdrawing the license. But for the time being, it's mostly about public statements of the TV presenters, but also some persons who have some relations with the TV channel. Thank you.
Sorry, one small additional question from me, because the focus of our event is on migration, or problem of people who are Russian citizens or people of Russian origin outside Russia. Are there any implications for the members of the staff of Dost after this decision?
Yesterday there were some news about the possible withdrawal of visas for the staff of the company, because if someone gets a visa on the basis of the employment and the employer basically disappears, then of course the question arises whether the visa will remain valid or not. In this particular case, the situation is quite interesting because people are hired not exactly by the TV station, but by the company to which TV station belongs. So theoretically speaking, they can continue the activities as a company without broadcasting still. So this is why it's difficult to predict what would be the particular consequences for the staff, whether the visas could be withdrawn or not.
Okay, thank you for legal comments, and now we're moving to political comments. Oh, Yana, please.
Thank you. Yes, I yesterday also a few times, probably it was me who raised the issue, I made a few comments in Estonian media. Dost is definitely anti-war and anti-Putin channel. There is absolutely no doubt. These allegations which were made, this Korostelov, he was fired on the same day. He was fired and they did apologize for that. If there is something which Alexei mentioned, that they were collecting money or some kind of help to Russian army, this is one case, but nobody knows if this was the case at the moment. They are working for 12 years now. And this is the reason why they were claimed foreign agents in Russia. And this is the reason that they have had to leave Russia. In Russia, they worked for 12 years, in Latvia for 4.5 months. And this is also, there is also a political dimension. I can imagine, I not can imagine, we know all for sure what was said by Russian state media about that. It was a huge gift to Putin, this stopping of their license. But they have a right to appeal and they probably will do so. So we'll see.
I think you got to understand that Dozd doesn't speak to the Latvian people, but to the Russian people. And I mean politically, I think it was extremely smart and legitimate for an opposition media to tell and to show to the Russian people that their government, their president, is even unable to give necessary shoes and raincoats and shapka to the Russian soldiers, and to tell the Russian families, you have your sons, fathers, husbands sent by this Mr. Putin to make war in a foreign country. And this president is not only a criminal, but is also completely inefficient, and so inefficient that your men, sons, husbands, fathers, are dying out of cold exactly as the Ukrainians do by the fault of Mr. Putin. So they are doing politics, Dozd. And I think, I'm also a journalist, you know, and I think it was smartly made. I think, I see I don't convince you, but nevertheless I will try. I think it was very smart to do that, to say that, to show the real situation. And it was certainly not, obviously not, in support of this war or in support of Mr. Putin. And I would have liked the Latvian authorities to understand such a simple situation.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, we received also a question online.
As you see, we don't have many people in the room, but we have like 40-something remote participants. And the question is, can the EU ask a ruling from European Court of Justice whether the presumption that Russian, Belarusian nationals represent a priori a threat to national security represents an infringement of human rights? You know, I'm not a lawyer to answer the question, so I have to ask for help from Vadim or Alexei. But just to mention that probably you know, I mean Estonians definitely know, that in the very beginning when we introduced its visa ban, I sent the letter to European Commission asking them when are they going to start infringement procedure for Estonia and Baltic states and Poland are violating Schengen visa code, which is true. This is clear violation, and what Ekaterina said just proves it. For we know very well that this list of exemptions which they do have on Finnish border is very different from Estonian one. So also if we look outside, the fact that you can enter European Union on different basis and according to different rules from different member states doesn't look good. I mean, if we want to be kind of, you know, united and based on the same laws and so on and so forth, but still we all know that the list of exemptions made by Finns is much wider and much more logical than, for instance, Estonian ones. In Estonia, I don't know, my sister is not a member of my family, so I cannot invite her. She lives in Russia. But if I would be Finn, she would be a member of my family, according to Finnish laws, and so on and so forth. But yes, we received some letters from the Commission. We are unhappy with these letters, and we will continue this exchange of views, I would say, and positions. But at the moment, the European Commission is, in my view, turning a blind eye to this violation of Schengen visa code. For I understand them, they have problems in other parts of Europe. And we still are not Viktor Orban, so they're dealing with him. And yesterday he blocked basically this financial aid to Ukraine, which was allocated by huge majority in the parliament and in the council and everywhere, but now it's blocked by Orban. And we have to solve this problem, so probably a possible violation of Schengen visa code is not high on the list of a priority of the European Commission right now, but we will continue to make pressure.
Yes, Yana, you are not a lawyer, but you answered the question quite nicely, also from the point of view of law. So, other questions, dear colleagues? Yes, please.
I have a question from Madame Toom. Unlike your colleagues on the panel here, when there was a vote in European Parliament saying that Russia is a terrorist state because it started the war, unprovoked war against Ukraine, you were abstaining. Why did you abstain? So you don't believe that Russia is a terrorist state?
I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Ilza Nagl and I'm from Latvia.
Very nice. But you know, you are confused with terminology as I was. We did not vote about Russia being terrorist state. About Russia being terrorist state, there was vote in Estonian parliament, in Latvian parliament, there was a vote in PASE, in Parliamentary Assembly of, and there was vote in NATO. But what was the vote in the European Parliament was Russia being sponsor of terrorism. And being sponsor of terrorism and being terrorist state is legally, I mean, I do not understand the difference, but Russia being sponsor of terrorism is legal term from United States of America. They do have this definition, and they do have appropriate law how to act if there is a country who is recognized as sponsor of terrorism. We do not have such law in European Union, and we have no idea what to do now. So in this resolution, there was a call for European Commission to work out some set of measures how to deal with somebody who is recognized sponsor of terrorism. That is the reason, and that is the reason why I abstained but not voted against, for I find, and I said it like many, many times, and I also said it today, that yes, Russia is aggression, Russia is guilty in this war, and we are absolutely on Ukrainian side, but I do not understand why did we entered American legal framework when we have our own.
I might
Yes, please.
add one point. When we had discussion about this question, Russia as a terrorist state, as a sponsor of terrorism, or as a state using means of terrorism. I myself introduced the last wording, state using means of terrorism, because this is a fact. In Ukraine, Russia uses means of terrorism by destroying water supplies, electricity supplies, and so on and so on, and bombing, of course, civil buildings. But Russia, sponsor of terrorism in Ukraine, this is actually completely ridiculous, because Russia doesn't sponsor terrorism in Ukraine. Russia uses terrorism in Ukraine. So I wasn't far from abstaining also, because I don't like our parliament using inappropriate wordings. But at the end, because I obtained also the wording using means of terrorism, I decided to vote for political reasons, because I wanted the parliament to condemn the fact that Russia uses means of terrorism in Russia. But until now, I am not happy, I am not comfortable with the first wording, sponsor of terrorism. Because let's make some history. During the 70s, the Soviet Union, at that time, the Soviet Union was a sponsor, for example, of the Bande Abadère, was a sponsor of Carlos, the very well-known and unfortunately famous terrorist, was a sponsor of many terrorist organizations around the world. At that time, it would have been perfectly correct and accurate to use this wording. In the case of this aggression against Ukraine, again, it's not. It's not.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, so maybe I have a question to our Russian participant. I will ask in Russian.
So you described the problems that you deal with on the Estonian border. And I understand that this is a complex question, but what do you think? What shall we do on the political level here in the Brussels to have no problems like that? So where are the bottlenecks? Who is to blame and what to do? These are the Russian questions. So this is a question to me. So I have been thinking about that, and one of the solutions is that in a special in the places where problematic border crossing points, there could be people who could explain the rights to the Ukrainian refugees, because one of the problems refugees do not understand what kind of rights they have, and if they can see the person wearing a uniform, and when that person starts behaving in a formal way and refusing them entry, usually these people are usually feel very much stressed. And in my opinion, this is social work that should be done. In my opinion, in those border crossing points that we spoke about, this as Narva, or Valny, Urban and Brest-Tiraspol, there should be some lawyers or representatives of the KBO, and also a social worker who will help refugees to formulate their stance in a very peaceful atmosphere, and also to give all the information that border guards would like to get, because refugees sometimes don't understand how to answer border guards' questions. So, for example, a refugee is crossing the border. So first it is the Russian border, then it is the European Union border. So there is the oversight of mobile phones on the Russian and European Union borders. And so those people remove the information from their phones, mobile phones. And when they are asked about where that person was on the 24th of February, for example, then this person cannot find this necessary information. So, for example, it may be correspondence with family members or some geo markings. For example, if I have an old lady who is in her 70s, who just got her smartphone just to call her relatives and not to surf online, then it is very difficult for her to decide what kind of information she can present to protect herself. And if there are some lawyers or social workers on the border crossing points who do not pose any threat to those refugees, here I'm talking not only about legal aspects of crossing the border, but also psychological aspects, because those people who come through Russia are the people who do not trust so much the officials. And when they get into the interrogation room and are interrogated by the European border guards, then we can see that they are at a loss and they are stressed. And in my view, it would be great if border guards just refuse asylum or the temporary protection for the refugee to cross the European Union territory to get to the destination, then that border guard could just say that that person can have just protection according to Geneva Convention, and then some other options, and then it would help a lot. And another thing is that so an institutional decision should be taken concerning people holding two passports. This is the kind of historic fact that people living in borderline areas have 2 passports, and sometimes even 3 if we speak about people living in Donetsk or Lugansk People's Republics. And to refuse a person to enter the European Union if a person has 2 citizenships, it is not legal, because the people have Ukrainian citizenship as well, and they should be just explained, and this should be changed.
It was indeed very informative, because we started with discussing problems of Russian nationals crossing the border, and we finished actually with very detailed account of problems faced by Ukrainian refugees, which is quite unexpected. It was quite unexpected for many participants of our event, I think, but this is the life. Okay, we are very close to the end of our event, and I would like to give the floor back to our key speaker, Yana Toom, for concluding remarks.
I will speak in Russian, if you allow me. I'm just speaking to interpreters.
So, as our colleagues from France and other countries left, but we have interpretation service, but we have about 40 members of parliament who participate in our event remotely. So, Ekaterina, thank you very much for the work that you do. And so we need to find power to manage. And this is the feeling which prevails. So within this guilt and responsibility, we need to find the ways to manage, and I think that we will be able to explain the situation here. Of course, we can hear very reasonable reasoning, and sometimes, though, those reasonings do not transform into political will. And as Dmitry was saying, it is not time when we can just pay attention to those smaller issues, because people living in Ukraine feel much worse. But I hope that common sense will win. And we are also thankful to Dmitry Muratov, who was ready to shoot the video and discuss this topic. So I think that we are going to continue working in this field, although it seems hopeless, but we need to continue working. So thank you very much for...
Hope that we got some new insights to move forward. Thank you.